Hey! Hey, where do you think you're going? This area is restricted.
I'm aware. I'm Commander Marcus Washington. I'm scheduled for the 1400 departure.
Commander, you got ID, buddy? Because you don't look like you belong anywhere near this aircraft.
I've been flying missions off this base for 6 years.
I have ID.
At exactly 2:07 p.m. on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon at Naval Air Station Norfolk, Virginia, the largest naval station in the world, a routine departure that should have lasted 4 minutes turned into a 9-minute confrontation that would ignite a national conversation. The base security camera footage that the private contracting agency initially tried to suppress and keep buried, would later go viral, racking up 47 million views across social media platforms in less than 72 hours. But this wasn't your typical confrontation at a security checkpoint video. This was different. This was a story about a man who had given 18 years of his life to the United States Navy, who had served in 3 combat deployments, who had earned every single one of the medals pinned to his dress uniform, being told he didn't belong somewhere he had reported to nearly every single day for 6 years. What happened next would shock the military community, spark a nationwide debate about racism in uniform and out of it, and prove once and for all that a badge and a high-visibility vest do not make a man more important than the truth. Before we continue, can you do me a favor? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button right now. This story gets significantly more intense, and you absolutely do not want to miss what happens next. Commander Marcus D. Washington was not your average 40-year-old. While most people his age were focused on mortgage payments and weekend plans, Marcus had spent the better part of 2 decades mastering one of the most demanding and dangerous careers in the entire United States military. He wasn't just a sailor. He wasn't just an officer. He was one of the most highly regarded helicopter pilots in the United States Navy, a man who had flown combat search and rescue missions in the Persian Gulf, coordinated multi-aircraft operations off the coast of Africa, and trained an entire generation of junior naval aviators to be calm under pressure. Marcus grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, the second of 4 children. His father worked double shifts at a steel plant. His mother was a school librarian who made sure every single one of her kids understood that education was not optional. Marcus was the kind of kid who took everything seriously: school, sports, responsibility, because he had watched his parents sacrifice everything to give him a foundation, and he refused to waste it. He enlisted in the Navy at 18, not because he had no other options, but because he had a specific vision. He wanted to fly, and the Navy was going to give him that opportunity. He scored in the 97th percentile on his ASVAB exam. He was accepted into the Naval Aviation School's command in Pensacola, Florida. He earned his wings of gold at 23 years old, one of the youngest in his class. Over the next 17 years, Marcus Washington climbed every rung of the ladder that the Navy put in front of him. He completed 2 combat deployments to the Persian Gulf. He flew over 3,200 flight hours, including 600 hours in combat zones. He was awarded the Navy Commendation Medal twice, the Air Medal with Combat V, and the Meritorious Service Medal. He had been promoted to the rank of commander at 38, 2 years ahead of the standard timeline, a distinction that speaks to the kind of officer his superiors believed him to be. By the time this story took place, Commander Washington was serving as the executive officer of Helicopter Sea Combat Squadron 7, known as the Dusty Dogs, one of the most decorated helicopter squadrons in the entire United States Navy. His responsibilities included overseeing flight operations, managing a staff of over 200 personnel, and ensuring mission readiness across a fleet of MH-60S Seahawk helicopters. He was, by every measurable standard, exactly the kind of man the United States military was built on. He also happened to be a black man in America, and on this particular Tuesday afternoon, that was the only thing that mattered to Officer Brian Kowalski. On the afternoon of September 14th, Commander Washington had spent the morning at a medical appointment off base. Nothing serious, a routine follow-up after a minor knee procedure he had undergone 2 months earlier. Because he had been off base for a personal appointment, he was dressed in civilian clothes. Dark slacks, a plain gray polo shirt, a simple watch on his left wrist. No uniform, no rank insignia visible. Just a man in his 40s, walking with the kind of quiet confidence that comes not from arrogance, but from 18 years of knowing exactly who you are and what you've built. He returned to Naval Air Station Norfolk just after 1:45 p.m. He had a 2 p.m. briefing with his squadron before a scheduled 1400. That's 2 p.m. in military time. Departure aboard one of the squadron Seahawks for a coordination meeting at Naval Station Oceana, about 30 minutes away by air. He had made this exact trip dozens of times. He knew every face on that flight line. He knew every technician, every crew chief, every air traffic controller by name. The sun was high and the tarmac shimmered with heat. The rotor blades of the MH-60S were already beginning their slow pre-flight rotation in the distance. The smell of jet fuel hung in the thick Virginia air. Everything was exactly as it always was. Familiar. Routine. His ground. Marcus Washington wasn't nervous. He wasn't in a hurry. He was simply walking to his aircraft, on his base, to do his job. Then he reached the secondary access gate to the flight line. And everything changed. The man standing at that secondary access gate was Officer Brian Kowalski, a 34-year-old security contractor employed by Titan Defense Solutions, a private firm contracted by the base to supplement military police personnel at lower traffic access points. Kowalski had been with Titan Defense Solutions for 8 months. Before that, he had worked loss prevention at a department store in Chesapeake, Virginia for 3 years. He had completed a basic security certification course that lasted 12 days. He had no military background whatsoever. This was routine for him, or so he thought. Check badges, wave people through, stand in the sun, collect a paycheck. Commander Washington approached the gate and reached into his pocket for his military common access card, his CAC card, the standard identification used by all Department of Defense personnel to access secure areas. He had it out and ready before he even reached the checkpoint. This was habit, 18 years of muscle memory. "Hey," Kowalski said, his voice carrying an edge that had nothing to do with professionalism. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" Commander Washington held up his CAC card. "Commander Washington, I'm heading to the flight line for a 1400 departure." Kowalski didn't reach for the card. He didn't scan it. He didn't even look at it closely. He looked at Marcus Washington the way some men look at a person they have already decided doesn't belong. A slow, dismissive scan from head to toe. "You got orders?" "Some kind of paperwork." This is where things already started to go wrong for Officer Kowalski. Commander Washington kept his voice completely level. "My CAC card is my authorization. That's standard DoD access protocol. I don't carry printed orders to walk to my own aircraft." Kowalski crossed his arms. "Well, I don't know you. I need to verify." "Then verify," Marcus said simply. "Scan the card. It will tell you everything you need to know." Kowalski didn't move toward the scanner. He just stood there, arms crossed, chest slightly puffed, doing the thing that insecure men do when they suddenly realize the only power they have is the ability to make someone wait. "Where's your uniform?" Kowalski asked. "I was at a personal appointment this morning," Marcus replied. "Civilian clothes are authorized for off-base activities." "Well, you're on base now." "I am," Marcus said, "which is why I'm presenting my credentials. Would you like to scan the card or not?" The body camera footage, Kowalski's own Titan Defense Solutions issued body camera, captured what happened next in perfect, unforgiving detail. Kowalski stepped slightly to the left, physically positioning himself more directly in front of the gate. "Not scanning, not processing, just blocking. I'm going to need you to step back and wait while I call this in." Now, most people at this point would feel a familiar, suffocating pressure begin to build. The pressure to apologize. The pressure to make themselves smaller. The pressure to perform harmlessness for a man who has decided, without evidence, that they are a threat. Most people would have taken a step back, would have said, "Of course, sir," would have done everything in their power to de-escalate, not because they were wrong, but because the consequences of being perceived as difficult while black in a confrontation with any kind of authority figure can be catastrophic. Commander Washington felt none of that pressure, not because he didn't understand it, not because he was reckless, but because he had learned, through 18 years of service, through every obstacle and every slight, and every moment where he had to be twice as good to get half the credit, that dignity is not something you negotiate. It is something you maintain. "You can absolutely call it in," Marcus said. "While you do, I want you to understand that I am Commander Marcus Washington, Executive Officer of HSC-7. I hold a top-secret security clearance. I have been operating off this flight line for 6 years. My departure is time-sensitive and my crew is waiting. I am not going to step back. I am going to stand right here while you make your call. and I am going to watch you make it. Kowalski stiffened. You could see it on the body camera footage. A slight tightening of the jaw. A shift of the weight. He was not used to people who didn't flinch. He picked up his radio. Quick question for everyone watching right now. Have you ever been in a situation where someone with a little bit of authority tried to make you feel like you didn't belong somewhere you had every right to be? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear your stories. What Kowalski said into that radio is what transformed this incident from an uncomfortable interaction into something that would end his career. The base security camera, a separate fixed camera mounted above the gate, picked up the audio clearly. Kowalski stepped slightly away from Commander Washington and spoke into his radio in a lowered voice. But not low enough. Yeah, I got a situation at Gate 7. Got a black male in civilian clothes claiming to be a commander. Says he's got a flight. Doesn't look like it to me. Can you send someone? He said black male, not individual in civilian clothes. Not unverified personnel. Not someone without a visible uniform. He said black male. And Commander Marcus Washington heard every single word. There was a silence after that. Not the silence of someone who was stunned or at a loss for words. The silence of someone who had just made a very calm, very deliberate decision. I need you to repeat what you just said into that radio, Commander Washington said, his voice so steady it was almost surreal given the circumstances. I need you to say it again, out loud, directly to me. Kowalski turned back around. I was just describing you for identification purposes. You described me by my race, Marcus said. My race is not my credential. My CAC card is my credential. You have not looked at it. You have not scanned it. And you just told your dispatch that a black male is claiming to be a commander, as if my race is the reason to be suspicious of my rank. I want you to understand that I am documenting this interaction. He reached into his pocket and held up his phone. He had been recording since the moment Kowalski blocked the gate. Kowalski's eyes went to the phone, then back to Marcus, then to the phone again. You can't record on a military installation. DoD policy does not prohibit personnel from recording interactions for personal documentation in non-classified areas. Marcus said, this gate is not a classified area, and I am permitted to record. He was absolutely right, and they both knew it. 2 minutes and 40 seconds after Kowalski's radio call, Master-at-Arms Petty Officer First Class Denise Holloway arrived at Gate 7 in a base security vehicle. She stepped out, looked at the situation, and immediately recognized Commander Washington. She had worked on this base for 4 years. She had seen him walk through this gate more times than she could count. Commander Washington, she said, the respect in her voice immediate and automatic. Petty Officer Holloway, he replied. She turned to Kowalski. What's the issue? I was attempting to verify his identity, Kowalski said. His CAC card is right there, Holloway said, nodding at the card still in Marcus's hand. Did you scan it? A pause. I was in the process of, did you scan it? Another pause. No. Petty Officer Holloway took the CAC card. She walked it to the scanner. She inserted it. The screen read, authorized. Commander, USN. TS/Psi clearance. HSC 7, Executive Officer. She handed the card back to Commander Washington. She looked at Kowalski one more time. Then she opened the gate. Commander, I apologize for the delay, she said. Thank you, Petty Officer Holloway, Marcus said. He walked through the gate without another word to Kowalski. The entire encounter had lasted 9 minutes and 12 seconds. 9 minutes and 12 seconds that would end Brian Kowalski's career in security forever. Now, most people who experience something like that might go home angry, might vent to their spouse, might post something on social media, might file a vague complaint that gets lost in a bureaucratic drawer somewhere and never sees the light of day. Commander Marcus Washington was not most people. That evening, after completing his mission at Naval Station Oceana and returning to NAS Norfolk, Marcus Washington sat down at his desk. He did not call a lawyer. He did not call the news. He did not post a single thing on social media. What he did was open his laptop and begin writing. What he produced over the next 3 hours was not just a complaint. It was a 14-page formal report. It was the kind of document that a JAG officer would have been proud to submit. It was thorough, methodical, chronological, and completely devastating. It cited specific Department of Defense directives regarding access control procedures. It cited equal opportunity regulations under the Military Equal Opportunity Program. It cited the specific language from Titan Defense Solutions' own contracted obligations to the base regarding non-discriminatory conduct. It included timestamps from both the body camera footage and the fixed security camera. It included the verbatim transcript of Kowalski's radio call, including the specific phrase, "black male claiming to be a commander." And it included his own phone recording as supporting evidence. He submitted it through the official chain of command at 11:47 p.m. the same night. He carbon copied the base commanding officer, the Naval Inspector General's office, and the equal opportunity officer assigned to NAS Norfolk. Then he went asleep. The Naval Station Norfolk Command received Commander Washington's report the following morning. By noon that same day, Brian Kowalski had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. Titan Defense Solutions was formally notified of the complaint and the pending review of their employees' conduct. This was not normal. These kinds of administrative processes typically take weeks just to get through the initial intake stage. But Commander Washington's report was so detailed, so precisely documented, and so thoroughly supported by camera evidence that the command had no procedural justification for delay. Every box was checked. Every claim was substantiated. There was nothing to question and nowhere to hide. The investigation was assigned to the base's Equal Opportunity Office in coordination with the Naval Inspector General's field representative. Senior Special Agent Patricia Ruiz was assigned as the lead investigator. She had handled over 100 similar cases in her 12 years with the Naval IG's office. She later said in a recorded interview that Washington's complaint was among the most meticulously prepared she had ever received from a non-legal professional. Agent Ruiz pulled the body camera footage from Kowalski's Titan Defense Solutions unit. She pulled the fixed security camera footage from Gate 7. She pulled the radio dispatch logs. She pulled Kowalski's employment records, his training documentation, his prior incident reports. And then she sat down and watched the footage. She watched it once. She watched it again. Then she called in her supervisor to watch it with her. The footage confirmed everything Commander Washington had written. Kowalski had failed to use the access card scanner at any point during the 9-minute interaction, a direct violation of the base access control protocol that Titan Defense Solutions employees were contractually required to follow. Kowalski had used a racially identifying descriptor in his radio call before making any attempt to verify identity through standard channels. Kowalski had physically positioned himself to obstruct access to a cleared DoD personnel member without procedural justification. Kowalski had made a false claim that recording was prohibited in a non-classified access zone. And Kowalski had shown visible deference and recognition only after a uniformed base security officer arrived and confirmed Commander Washington's identity, meaning his challenge was never about procedure. It was about perception. But then Agent Ruiz found something else in the records, something that made this case significantly more serious. In reviewing Titan Defense Solutions incident logs from Gate 7 over the previous 8 months, she found that Brian Kowalski had filed 7 prior delay or detainment reports, all involving personnel in civilian clothing who were attempting to access the flight line. She cross-referenced the names on those reports. 6 of the 7 were Black or Latino service members. The one white service member on the list had been detained for 11 seconds before being waved through without a scan. The average delay for the others was 6.5 minutes. This was not an isolated incident. This was a pattern. Do you think the base command did enough once they found out about that pattern? Let me know what you think in the comments below. The investigation took 19 days in total. 19 days, which is remarkably fast for a contractor misconduct and civil rights review. The evidence was simply too clear, and Commander Washington's documentation was too thorough for it to take any longer. The findings were released in a formal statement from the Naval Station Norfolk Command in coordination with the Naval Inspector General's office. The official findings stated that Officer Brian Kowalski had failed to follow standard DoD access control procedures on the date in question. They stated that his radio communication contained racially identifying language in a context that was not procedurally justified. They stated that his conduct toward Commander Washington constituted a racially discriminatory obstruction of a credentialed DoD personnel member. And they stated that the pattern of incidents identified in his 8-month record at Gate 7 demonstrated a systemic bias that could not be attributed to procedural misunderstanding. Titan Defense Solutions terminated Brian Kowalski's employment 2 days before the official findings were even published. They had seen the footage. They knew what was coming. His 8-month career as a base security contractor was over. The Naval Station Norfolk Command also formally recommended that Titan Defense Solutions contract be reviewed and placed enhanced oversight requirements on all civilian contractor personnel operating at base access points. Commander Washington's phone recording was never publicly released by him. He never gave an interview. He never held a press conference. He never made a single social media post about the incident. The footage became public only because a Freedom of Information Act request filed by a local Virginia journalist forced the release of the body camera and security camera footage 3 weeks after the investigation concluded. When that footage hit the internet, it didn't just go viral. It detonated. News outlets from every major network ran the story within 24 hours. Social media shared it tens of millions of times across every platform. Military veterans posted reaction videos breaking down the footage frame by frame. Active duty service members from every branch left comments and shared their own stories. Military equal opportunity training programs at bases across the country added the incident to their coursework within 2 months. Several veterans advocacy organizations cited it in formal testimony to Congress during a hearing on racial equity in military contracting. Some people praised Commander Washington for his composure and his precision. They called him an example of how to handle these situations with dignity and documentation. Others criticized him online, saying he should have just shown his ID faster, as if the problem was his pace and not Kowalski's bias. Some said he was being too sensitive, that Kowalski was just doing his job. Others pointed out that if Kowalski had been doing his job, he would have scanned the card, which he never once attempted to do. But here is what nobody, not a single person on any side of any argument, could deny. Commander Washington was right about everything. Every single thing he said in that 9-minute interaction was accurate, legally correct, procedurally sound, and documented. And everything Kowalski did was wrong. After the story went viral, other black service members came forward with documented complaints about interactions with Kowalski at Gate 7. 2 of them had filed informal complaints at the time that had not been escalated. One had simply not said anything because, as he put it in a public statement, he didn't think anyone would believe him over his security officer. One was a female Navy lieutenant who had been made to wait 11 minutes while Kowalski called in her credentials, despite the fact that she was in full uniform. Turns out it had never been an isolated incident. It had never been a misunderstanding. It had been a pattern enabled by institutional indifference. And it had continued for 8 months because no one had documented it the way Commander Washington did. And that raises a question that this story forces us to sit with. How many other gates are there? How many other Kowalskis are standing at checkpoints, at entrances, at doors, armed with just enough authority to make people feel like they don't belong? And how many of their targets don't have 18 years of military discipline teaching them to stay calm, document everything, and fight back through the system? As of today, Commander Marcus Washington continues to serve in the United States Navy. Following the incident, he was selected for promotion to the rank of captain, one of the most competitive advancement milestones in the Naval Officer Corps. He completed his tour as executive officer of HSC-7 and was subsequently assigned to the Pentagon as part of a Naval Aviation Policy Review Board. He has spoken privately to junior officers about the importance of documentation and knowing your rights within the military system. He has never spoken publicly about the incident, not once. Brian Kowalski is no longer employed in any security or law enforcement capacity. Following his termination from Titan Defense Solutions, he applied to 2 other private security firms. Both rejected him after conducting background checks that surfaced the Inspector General findings. He works in retail warehouse logistics in the Hampton Roads area. Here is a question for everyone watching. If you were in Commander Washington's position, would you have stayed as calm as he did? Genuinely, would you have held it together the way he did? Drop your honest answer in the comments. Let's talk about the bigger picture here, because this story is about so much more than one gate and one bad security guard. This story is about what happens when institutional racism wears a uniform that isn't military. It is about the gap between the authority a person is given and the accountability they are actually held to. And it is about what becomes possible when someone refuses to shrink. Think about what Kowalski was counting on. He was counting on the same thing that people in his position have always counted on. He was counting on the fact that most people, when confronted with any kind of authority figure who questions their right to be somewhere, will back down, will apologize, will make themselves smaller, will do whatever it takes to make the discomfort stop. He was counting on Marcus Washington not knowing his rights, not having his documentation, not being willing to stand there, phone out, recording every single second, and say with absolute clarity, "I belong here. Prove that I don't." And the reason that calculation fails against someone like Commander Washington is not just because Marcus is exceptional, though he absolutely is. It's because Marcus had spent 18 years being told, in 100 different ways, that he needed to be prepared, that he needed to be twice as sharp, twice as composed, twice as documented. And he took that lesson seriously, not as a burden, but as a weapon. Most people don't know the specifics of DoD access control directives. Most people don't know that civilian contractor employees are bound by non-discrimination obligations written into their base access contracts. Most people don't know that they are legally permitted to record in non-classified areas of a military installation. And some authority figures count on that ignorance. They count on people being too overwhelmed, too frightened, or too exhausted by the calculus of risk that Black people in particular have to do in real time during every interaction with authority. But when you encounter someone like Commander Washington, someone who knows exactly what the rules are, who can cite them in the moment, who has already thought through every possible escalation and prepared for it, the entire dynamic collapses. The high visibility vest doesn't win. The crossed arms don't win. The deliberate obstruction doesn't win. Knowledge becomes the equalizer. Documentation becomes the armor. And calm becomes the most powerful weapon in the room. Let's address something that came up when this story went viral, because it needs to be said directly. Some commenters online said that Commander Washington made things harder for himself by not just complying faster. They said he should have stepped back when asked. They said he should have been more accommodating to avoid escalation. They said his attitude was the problem. Here's the thing. The body camera footage shows a man who spoke respectfully, who presented his credentials immediately, who offered to stand and wait while the call was made, and who never once raised his voice. If that is an attitude problem, then the word attitude has lost its meaning. As for the argument that he should have just complied to keep things smooth, that is exactly the mindset that allowed Kowalski to operate unchecked for 8 months. That mindset says that the burden of a racist person's bias should be carried by the person being targeted. That the way to avoid discrimination is to be more accommodating of the person discriminating against you. That is not how rights work. That is not how dignity works. Yes, there is a real and painful truth that Black men in America have to calculate their physical safety in real time during interactions like this one. Commander Washington knew that risk. He was on a military base, surrounded by people who knew him, with a phone recording in his hand. He made an informed, calculated decision to stand his ground because he determined the situation was one where standing his ground was survivable and necessary. But the fact that standing your ground, while Black requires that kind of risk calculation in the first place, that tells you everything you need to know about what this story is really about.